Thank you, James. Yes. Right. Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I think I take out my mask first.
Yeah, you should.
Mask is outdated. Okay. So, yeah, I'm truly honored and humbled to be able to moderate this plenary of industry veterans and practitioners, especially Everbridge, which I understand that the company was formed a day after 9/11. Wow. It's amazing, where they suddenly discovered that it's so important to systematically handle crisis and communication as well. That's what I learned from them. I don't know all this, but I'm not expert in this. I learned from them. Okay, so I think resilience is key, and then critical response is even more paramount in today's world. Without further ado, I think I'll jump straight into some critical question that I believe a lot of them, these are very close to their heart. I think I have a list of questions which was listed, and we have also discussed before, some of which are not relevant. I think today, in a limited time span, we will zoom into the very relevant one. So I think the first one is about strategies. Very broad topic, but I think with today's panel, we will zoom into certain strategies which are very focused on upholding resilience in enterprises. I think for my first question, I would ask, what's the best strategy that organization can adopt, all right, to actually mitigate crisis situation? I will direct the first question to Graeme.
Perfect, thank you. I think,
okay.
I think that's a really interesting topic, and I think that the key for me is, we've heard a lot about this throughout today around acceptance, right? And I think the key aspect for me is first of all, there has to be acceptance in the organisation that change is needed. I was working with an organisation this week, and it was really interesting. The term that came out was transformation for resilience. When I look at things like digital trust and organisations, transformation for resilience is really, really key. Because if you go back 20, 25 years, I'm sure Blockbuster would love to have spoken about transformation for resilience to still be here today. So I think resilience has become so important to organisations on so many levels, because it's all about how do we best serve our customers, how do we respond to incidents to ensure trust. So actually taking a step back into what that actually means, I think there's some core concepts that organisations that do resilience well focus on post-bang, right? And I talk about post-bang. The key aspect for me is one, is being able to actually have insight as to what the risk is to the organisation. And I think a lot of people try and do this. I'll give an example. The first starting point for organisations from risk management is the fire drill. Everyone practices the fire drill, but what does the alarm mean? The alarm means get out of the building, but it doesn't contain the context. What does it actually mean to us as a business? How many people are impacted? What core processes are impacted? So for me, when I talk about incident management or responding to an event, it's to be able to understand what it means to us as a business, what is being impacted, who is being impacted, but then how do we respond? And that's really the core aspect, because for me, you have to enable correct decision making. And the only way to do that is with the data that you have available to you. So when we look at the data element, for me, good organizations smash down, and I'm going to say that again, smash down the silos, because the problem is in organizations, we have worked in all of our individual silos for too long. And that really creates this heavy response time for organizations rather than it being horizontal and seamless. It creates friction, which causes delays, which increases the risk to the organization. So for me, organizations that do this well focus on core areas, which is one, understanding what the impacts are, two, understanding what that impact means to the business and ultimately the consumers of their services, three, how they then respond, and four, how they then collate that information to learn and evolve. Those are really the core aspects for me that when organizations do that well, they respond to risks in the most appropriate manner.
Okay. Wow, transformation is already a very strong word to me. Now he used the word smash down. I believe there will be a lot of change management to be made. I think we have a lot to learn from him. Let's progress to the next focus area, whereby it's also related to strategy and this smash down transformation, which is something inevitable in today's world where all of us remember the hardship that we've gone through in lockdown, right? I mean, in lockdown, what are the considerations and what are the impacts to supply chain disruption, right? Think about it. We have experienced this, it's very close to everybody's heart here. And also the demand destruction. The way I see it is the demand, change of demand pattern, right? I mean, during the lockdown, you can see certain sectors are COVID lift, right? They do better business, medical, whether they sell pets, vet shop, bicycle shop, they're selling very well, right? Then there are COVID hit one, I mean, directly like F&B, airlines and travel. So there is a very mandated, ruthless transfer of wealth in the sector. So let's hear from Genie, yeah. And what are the impacts of this and what would be the employee behavior that we should consider? During lockdown,
Yeah. So I thought Graeme just created a new hashtag, Smashdown. So we're talking about lockdown, but maybe if we were to just roll back a little bit and let me set the context. I think when we talk about, because I mean, really just relating to the theme today on digital trust, I think trust in the traditional sense has always been to do with people to people, organization to organization, people with governments and so on and so forth, in the physical sense. But I think things just changed. And of course, the lockdown accelerated all of that with internet transactions just, going sky high overnight, literally. So for instance, I just arrived in the airport this morning and then came straight here. I was speaking at a press conference in Jakarta earlier this week. And I was just sharing some astounding statistics to the media there that before COVID and after COVID, the internet usage pickup rate increased by 35 million just in that country. It's crazy, right? So which means that internet adoption rate actually accelerated during COVID, during lockdown, during the pandemic. And so the world that we live in today is driven by consumer and social behavior, right? And and just to share, and there is a huge issue in terms of digital trust because we're talking about personal information, personal data, financial information, for instance, that could possibly be exploited. So just to give a very recent case study that my company was researching into, there was a particular certificate authority, we call it CA for short, in an Asian country in recent times, where, for those of you who are not sure what a certificate authority does, it's a little bit like they're responsible for the digital certs of individuals in that country. SingPass, right? So yeah, so they're responsible for SingPass, and which means that you can imagine it's critical information infrastructure involved because your personal data, your housing, your financial information, your personal data, everything is in there, right? So there was a plugin apparently the system of the CA was compromised, yeah? And then there was a particular, of course the government of that country would rely on the CA, correct, for information and all that. And so the government downloaded Trojanized packages that were infected with PhantomNet malware, which, after some research, were found the characteristics of PhantomNet was like extremely similar to Coughing Down malware, which is widely known to be involved in cyber espionage activities targeted at the Asian demographics. So now this is really just an example out of many of how the ICT supply chain that you and I are part of can impact us. And with internet usage, mobile banking, mobile usage and all that, being very vulnerable and open and possibly, to phishing attempts, spyware, so on and so forth, we actually are exposing ourselves to possible attacks because of the weakness in the system. And in this case, the government was actually the target. But the attack came in through another party in the ICT supply chain, which is the CA, the Certificate Authority. And at the end, who suffers? Not just the government, but you and I, people who are affected and whose data reside in that CA. So I think it just brings to life, hopefully, the entire conversation around digital trust and the impact of the lockdown on individuals. Yeah.
Sure. So we have, recall a little bit, we have trust built on robust resilience, transformation, trust built on robust system. So in the earlier conversation with the team, there was a notion of so-called smart security. It's very interesting. So I would like to ask Dirk on your opinion. There is so-called best practices for smart security, and what are all these smart security, and how do we increase enterprise resilience by unifying all this risk intelligence, physical security, and critical communications?
That's a nice question, by the way, to start your afternoon.
Hope it's not too heavy going.
Should be fine, I guess. Okay. Now, there are a few important parts, words, in fact, in the question themselves. You talk about unified, you talk about integration almost, the automation aspect is there. But there is also the context about the process. And Graeme, you spoke a little bit about the process on a higher level. But in the process, it's all about, okay, risk assessment, the first thing that you were mentioning. But behind that, it's not just risk assessment. It's also looking at, okay, what is the plan? How do I going to mitigate all that? How do I going to implement and operate the whole situation? So you need to talk about the whole spectrum. If you look, of course, about the risk assessment, you need to look at the totality. And it's already in the question himself. So you really need to look at not only the infrastructure, the network infrastructure, the IT part. You need to look at the physical aspects, up to even the CCTV. By the way, one of the elements today who is really underutilized. So you need to use as well, or look as well to the people that you have, the staff members that you have. Are they trained? Do they understand the risks? So first you really need to sit down and write down what is the risks, linked, of course, to your business. A hawker center, of course, going to have less risk than a multinational, pretty obvious, right? But that's the first part. Then you need to look at the planning. But as you have already discovered very quickly in the risk assessment, it's not longer the job of IT, it's not longer the job of the security officer. It's the C-level who need to start to interfere on that. And from there onwards, you need to make your plan. And you're going to see it's not a plan you can implement in 1 year. Or I throw $100,000 on it and it's fixed. No. It needs to go into the gene of the organization. And for me, that's where the culture of your company plays an important role. You need to be part of that. Okay? And then, of course, you have the rollout and the operational aspects. Very, very normal. But coming back to your words from the unified and it need to be integrated and it need to be automated, these elements, I would like to bring it down and give an examples of what we as Alcatel-Lucent Enterprise try to do. Okay? We are delivering IT network infrastructure. Okay, basic stuff, right? But at the end of the day, if you look down to that, we have zero trust, everybody, right? But we do even zero trust in build stage. You don't find that so often. What do they mean? All the software is checked by third parties. The delivery is TAA compliant. We even have our software, each time you reboot, we call it OS diversification, the memory allocation is completely different. So even when you hack in one system, you cannot hack in the second one because the memory is really completely different. So we go to that extent. It's really built by design, security by design, very important. Then, of course, when you connect people, when you connect devices, IoT, you call it, everything needs to be authenticated. Even network devices connected need to be authenticated and of course, encrypted if possible. And by doing that, we make it possible to segment everything to the smallest element possible. If you are not in there, you cannot do anything. As simple as that, right? If you have no access, nothing can happen. Plus, we do it even on a context-based time of day location-based. And that's with location awareness, you can do that. So we go extremely deep in creating that trust by implementing it as we speak, okay? Now, from a collaboration point of view, what we also do, communication and collaboration, where it becomes critical, of course, we are not, yes, we are sitting in the cloud as well, yes, of course. We have all the certificates, you call them, you know them, privacy implementations, of course. But our solution is enterprise-focused. It's not consumer-focused. So that creates also already an extra layer. And then you have, of course, the last piece of the element, is how do I now integrate all that? Yes, we have a workflow operating software, allow you to take all the information from all the equipment we have, but it can also integrate with, in the total list, there's 140 integrations out of the box. So building management systems, video, CCTV, all, video AI, everything that you can imagine can be integrated in that platform, and we can use that to send critical alerts. Now again, when we say critical alerts, SMS, critical enough? Maybe. For normal persons, yes. But for critical staff, no. All the applications on your smartphone rely on push notification. Is that critical? No. Because it's best effort only. So you need to have even a technology who is able to look beyond that and notify even the guy who is part of the intervention team when he is not longer connectable or reachable, that he is informed, not that the device stays silent. So we are really working in that whole process to make sure that we can indeed answer to that demand of trust and the processes, everything is in place. And then the last part is really the people, and I can tell you the organization is really focusing on that a lot. We are making equipment, we are selling it through partners, so we need to be secure in the whole chain. Every one of us, each staff member is obliged to follow training, security trainings. There are a lot of them available on LinkedIn, so that's not a problem. And we go even up to the end of mental health. So each of us is registered in an application called Headspace to make sure that even the staff stays mentally healthy in the situation like this. So as a shortcut, yes, you need to think about integration. You need to think about unifying everything, and you need to think about automation. Once you do that, with the processes in place, you cannot miss.
Wow, very holistic perception. Very good. Thank you, Dirk. Yeah, so basically unified, integrated, people, process, technology, as well as you suggested the strategies of having isolated, probably isolated segments, as well as security by design. Wow, very good points. Thank you, thank you. And incidentally, this leads to the next question that I go one circle coming back to Graeme. Yes, none other than strategies again. I think hearing the systems aspect, the holistic aspect of the other two speakers, I was thinking that in the earlier conversation with you, you were saying about the tool, the platform, and you're talking about premise restructuring. Wow, very bombastic to me. So I think we'll get the expert to explain a little. Yeah, please share with us more how this can help.
Sure. I guess, first of all, can I ask, I'm going to get the audience involved. How many of you work from home now? How many of you worked from home 3 years ago? There's a stark difference, right? And I think that's a starting point for organizations. We've gone from working in an office and having maybe 3 or 4 office locations to suddenly having hundreds, if not thousands of locations, right? So when we take a step back and we start looking at, from a resilience perspective or even a duty of care perspective, the lines have changed. And it's a very tough job for organizations to now have that change. Now, I'll throw out a couple of examples immediately. How many people upgrade the firmware on their internet router? Again, 1, 2, there's a couple in the room. Can you start seeing now the challenges that organizations are facing because they're having to enable people to work from other locations which are less regulated. So now the risk is growing for the organization, but also it's not just about the digital risk, it's also the physical risk. Right? What happens if I lose an entire call center capability because a lot of my call center staff live in a single area and the power goes down? You know, this is happening, it's real and happening. That directly impacts my ability to serve the customer. So when we talk about technology and the value of technology, it's not just about what we do with inside our walls, but also what we do outside of the walls. I think you highlighted some really key points there, which for me is, well, how do we regulate what we're doing inside and outside? And technology does enable us to do that. So when we look at things such as VPN connectivity, you know, one of the first processes that we started seeing organizations doing was removing people from the VPN as soon as there was an antivirus alert, right, to try and mitigate the risk. Now, you're never ever going to get rid of the whole risk, and I'm not going to sit here and say that's going to happen, but there are elements of technology that enable you to respond faster and more proactively rather than being reactive. And I think that's really the core element of technology coming into the ecosystem, is how do we move from a reactive state to a proactive state? Now, a lot of the organizations that we partner with or we rely on, we look at energy organizations. They're now being proactive in sending out alerts, predefined outages, all of those types of things being sent to us. But if we're not able to then disseminate that information outwards and understand actually what we can do, then we're not utilizing the information in our ecosystem to our advantage. One of the risk registers that we went through recently was around the power outage and things like that for core services with a bank, was actually the physical location become the INVAC site. Right? Honestly, because people don't want to return to the office, right? They've got the office facility now as, if in effect, the DR capability for them to be able to continue operations should there be sustained outages for a period of an hour or more. So when we start looking at, right, how do we take a step back and map those processes, the key element is to start on the risk register. Understand what is the risk, whether it be physical or digital. And I'm going to ask for a wry smile here, I'm sure. You know, there are information points that we don't keep updated. Right? There's very few organizations that I've met where their CMDB, for example, is up to date. I hate to say it, I'm sure a lot of people in this room are sort of going, I'm not sure. But actually, have we mapped the technology to the core processes? And actually how the process would be impacted should our technology be impacted? Or our downstream providers being impacted? What does that mean to our core processes? For me, technology enables us to bring all of that information together, process it, because we're looking at this now in that holistic fashion and a horizontal fashion, whether it's a digital or physical risk, and then take immediate steps from a remediation perspective. And that remediation perspective can be an automation program to remove someone from an API, or to actually lock a door because we've got a known actor within, you know, from an insider threat perspective that shouldn't be in that location at that point, right? And then actually communicate and push the process to the next step. So when we look at actually the benefit of technology, I think there's two areas that I would really focus on. One is the consolidation of the data points that matter most. And then second is to take that immediate action point to kickstart the process that has been predefined. So again, hopefully there's some anecdotal use cases there for you, some things to think about, but I think honestly, the risk register is the starting point, and the policy and the process can then be driven into technology to drive faster response time. And the speed is key. Okay?
Wow, interesting. Okay. Help me to recall and relate to, okay, what happened is I happened to also involved in an event in Everbridge, I think a month ago. And I've seen the platform. Wow, it's like Star Trek control center, you know. You have big screens and all the joints. And
are you inviting me for the next one?
Of course. Of course, it's there to look at.
Yeah, that's right. And maybe you can relate a little bit more how this risk register and how this coordination be able to, yeah.
Absolutely. I think, you know, the core aspect that we all deal with on a daily basis is a volume of noise. Right? I'm sure we all sit here, we've all been experienced in regards to whether it's email alerts, system alerts, third-party alerts. The core aspect of that coming in is that we don't actually know what it means. So when we look at the technology from an Everbridge perspective, it focuses on solving those core problems that I outlined earlier on. One is bringing in all of that data into a visualization console. So then we're able to then see in real time all of the risk events, whether this is inside our building or outside of our building, as well as all of our core assets. Right? And when I talk about an asset, it's really simple. It's what are the bad things that we care about, or the bad things that could impact us, and what are the things that we care about. So when we bring those two things together onto a map view, we're able to start overlaying now things such as our office locations, our employee home addresses, our supply chain routes. Right? The Suez Canal incident come up earlier on, right? And then our suppliers. Right? So then we have a real clear view very quickly on what the overall risk posture is from the organization. But when we start overlaying the alerts, we're now able to actually process the alert and overlay what that impact is. So going from one location to multiple locations, suddenly what we've got is we now, instead of having 1 or 2 events that we need to manage, we might have 20 or 30. And they could range in risk to the organization. But without us being able to then quickly disseminate that information, whether it's 5,000 alerts coming in and we're actually focused on 20, that information is then visual. And then from a system perspective, the SOPs and those processes that have been predefined are within the platform and they're able to be automated or triggered from that central location. So rather than us have to swivel our chairs and go from our alert mechanism to our people systems to our SOP system, it's all in the single place to enable us to quickly respond in that authorized manner. And I say authorized manner because it's amazing to me that how many organizations I work with, the response time and the effectiveness of the response is dependent on who is leading the incident. That for me is a sacrilege state of affairs, because why should that matter? Why are we not enabling people to respond in a confident fashion? Right? If there's a policy that's been defined, I should have confidence as the operator that I'm doing the right thing. It shouldn't matter that I've got a job title or not. It really shouldn't. And that is what the system brings, because it's enforcing that cultural element that you're talking about, taking out this element of, and I hate to say it, ego that tends to then really drive into how incidents are managed. And I'm sure we've all experienced that. So that's the ultimate play, if you like, from a technology perspective.
Yes, it's still in my mind, this whole Star Trek thing. And I think the audience, if you have a chance, you can contact Graeme to have a first-hand experience of this Star Trek thing that give you informed decision-making too, right? Yeah. I get the right thing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we go another round circle back to Genie. I think this question is, applicable to all. I'll go one round later. What matters most during crisis in your business?
Well, thanks for the question. Maybe I'll break this down into 2 parts. First, what matters most for my business at Kaspersky, and also what matters most for the businesses that we help. Yeah, so we'll aggregate everything. So now, during crisis, and I think what comes to mind immediately would be the pandemic. Is it over yet? I still see people wearing masks. So I think we pretend that it's not there, but it's there. So we're living with it. It's not over. And also borrowing a little bit from Graeme's comments to the earlier questions, the pandemic literally changed the way we work. The number of hands just now for people who work from home before the pandemic, 1. And after, almost the entire room. So what matters most, I think, to all kinds of businesses would be business continuity during crisis, right? And to a large extent, because of COVID, and even before COVID, but now accentuated because of COVID, technology continuity becomes paramount in ensuring business continuity, right? And look at things this way. before the pandemic, when people were working from an office together, as opposed to people, thousands of them, tens of thousands, millions, working from their homes or remotely well, somewhere, apart from the office. And a lot of these small, medium enterprises are actually not equipped with something so basic as a VPN connection, for instance. Yeah, and which is why they are very prone to being hit by anything, from an ICT supply chain attack to ransomware or both, because the attack surface has simply been magnified as a result of changed working behavior, social behavior, consumer behavior, as a result of the crisis, whether it's a pandemic whatsoever. But I mean, a very recent example that's we're still facing right now would be the pandemic. So I think it would be business continuity that is driven by technology continuity, and again, drawing, well, references back to my response to the first question you asked me, ICT supply chain. Integrity is extremely important. So.
Thank you, Genie. I think I add a little bit more to BCM. Yeah, as I run the IT operation on the group, BCM is good, ERM is good, DR planning is good, but I learned a very interesting lesson is the dry run is very important.
You're right.
Yeah.
The rehearsal is as important as the performance.
Exactly. So we had this dry run where we thought we were very confident because we are a main board listed company and they have a lot of compliances. I thought I have done all my work. There's a year in audit that someone suggested a dry run. Yes, I dry run, and we found so many gaps in our entire plan. Yeah, we can't Google to learn cycling, right? I mean, we really need to practice it, and we can't practice it all the time. How to practice crisis, I don't know, but dry run will be the closest that we can go to. So I really want to share this experience that I really learned a lot from the experience.
Can I just add on that?
Sure.
Because you were just picking up on that question about like how do we practice a crisis, right? There are actually tools that are available already. So for instance, we actually developed an interactive simulation, sort of a game setting. It's gamified, a crisis setting, and getting people to come together in groups or as individuals and playing, as a team, whatsoever, up to you, and just try and navigate, things, crisis recovery and all that, and even right down to public communications to the business customers and end users. So there are tools right now to help organizations practice dealing with a crisis. So, and hopefully also have good learning points from there. So it's just in case you're interested, you can come talk to me or Google it. It's Kaspersky Interactive Protection Simulation. Yeah, KIPS.
So I just wonder then, this is something like gamification?
Gamification and modeled after actual real life scenarios that actually happened in recent times.
Everbridge would have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah.
fantastic. The other aspect that we see a lot of
Yeah.
organisations moving to now
Yeah.
is the digital twin.
Yeah.
The digital twin, I don't know if you're familiar with this phrase. Yep, perfect. Couple of nods. I think digital twinning is something, especially for gamification, that is really fantastic. And, it's something that I think just breeds that real life scenario. I mean, I've seen it horribly in schools, Jewish school, where they're practicing kids running away with gunshots happening and things like this. But gamification is something that I think is really important because, it's amazing how many little aspects come into to play when you actually gamify the situation. And yeah, fatigue.
And it's also interesting to see how the players react. It's really fun. Yeah.
Oh, fun. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Nowadays, every time I fresh out my name card, people give me QR code. Then I thought dry run, they talk about gamification. Wow. Yeah.
This is the most interesting panel today.
Oh, all right. You're running very fast. So back to the same topic, what matters most? I know this deviated from what we discussed earlier, but I thought this is something very important to all and very close to everybody's heart. And with that in mind, maybe can I ask, I think we start with Graeme first, if you don't mind. Yeah. Then, in your view and experience of helping so many companies, what matters most in their business, as you see, when crises happen?
Well, I think there's two aspects to look at it. I think, you know, the key aspect, if I look at Everbridge as an example, we're a mission-driven organisation focused on keeping people safe and businesses running. Yeah. And I think that's a really good starting point for a lot of organisations, because a lot of organisations, you know, without their people, they don't operate. And then to keep the business running is obviously of vital importance. I think that the key aspect when I look at crisis response for organisations is the ability to respond in a coordinated fashion that is compliant is a lot of times where people start. And I think the compliant element for me ruins it slightly, because people tend to look at it as a tick box. Whereas now what we've seen is there's actually a change because of the way that organisations are having to serve their consumers. You know, they're having to serve the customer in a different way. And I think the key aspect is you know, I use a couple of, we used to have the golden hour, right? My God, I guarantee us, we all wish we had the golden hour now, right? And then it went to the golden 15, and then it's already on social media. So I think that the key aspect now is the way that organisations respond has had to change, because the way that the consumers are operating has changed. So there's now no time for a delay. They have to be proactive in the communication. They have to shut down the noise that's coming in, because it ultimately impacts their brand. Sure. And you know, if you look at some of the real key events that have happened, even across the past 5 or 10 years, the response to the event has actually impacted the outcome for the organisation. You know, I'll cite a couple. The Talk data breach, right? It's a while ago, but the CEO coming out and sitting in front of a Windows 95 screen. I mean, yeah,
that's it.
You sort of get my point. So I think
don't judge.
Yeah, I'm not judging. I'm not judging, but it's not the first time that's happening. It's not going to be the last. Optus 2 weeks ago, a month ago now. You know, how organisations deal with the response to the event actually impacts the customer confidence in them moving forward. So I think actually incident management has a new priority for a board, because they've seen it's not if it happens, we have to look at it as when it happens. Yeah. And that's really the key aspect that I think is the most important thing for organizations. Sorry.
I think we have a lot to learn from you in this respect, because seeing from cyber perspective, because we run all the cyber operations, right? I think I can only say that peacetime and wartime is a very different thing. And I really respect people who can action with a clear mind during wartime. How to do that, I don't know. Some people just have the talent, but of course, with the platform that you offer, it does help. Yeah, definitely. Yes. So, Dirk, yes.
Okay. So for me, I come back to the starting point, who is really the culture of the organization. If you look at internally, we have an operating model who is absolutely communicated constantly. On top of that, it's all about agility, customer focus, flexibility. And we need to make sure that we are on top of everything. If you look, for example, with the crisis that happened, with all the different influences that you can get, you have material shortage to manufacture. Then you have delivery problems. Then you give that equipment to your partners who need to implement it. They have then issues with their customers who are not ready, or they're waiting for something else. Then you're going to have even payment issues coming in because they cannot pay you. So you have a lot of that crisis have impact almost everywhere. Now, if you have a culture who is really focused on the flexibility and agility and customer focus, then immediately tiger teams comes into the picture. Immediately groups of war guys are coming in.
SWAT team, right?
Yes, the SWAT team, to really figure out how can we solve all the little things that are coming up to us. So for me, the answer is really, it's embedded in the culture. And yes, of course, at the back end, you need all the security and blah, blah, blah. That's a given. But that culture aspect for me, I think that's the number one.
Wow, militant culture and mindset. Yep. Wow, that's not easy. Okay, so I think got to be mindful of time, and usually I would like to wrap up plenary with a good take home, right? so that you can take away with the idea that you remember, not just coming here for the plenary and go home and forget about it. It must be something useful, right? So let's go one round, all the elevator takeaway that you would like to advise the audience in today's context. Trust, resilience, yeah. Genie, yes.
Okay. I didn't want to assume, yeah.
Okay.
So I think it's post-COVID, or rather we're so sick of COVID that we want to pretend it's not there, even though there are still people are wearing masks. But we're living with it. So I think a lot of businesses, as we observe, are currently in a stage where they're planning for economic recovery, sort of making up for lost times. Because a lot of businesses, if they survived till today, they survived the pandemic and the effects of the pandemic. Inadvertently, for most businesses, they would have lost a lot of money in the meantime, in the last 2 to 3 years. So I think the key learning point for me, when we talk to businesses that we help, it's business recovery, economic recovery. And an important reminder would be, don't let cyber incidents affect your road to recovery.
So basically, be very alert and well prepared.
Yes, and resilient. Ensure your systems, infrastructure, technology, people understand. I still do walk into some organizations' offices where I'm hosted to a visit, where I walk past some cubicles and I see a password pinned to the corkboard of a particular staff in that cubicle. So, well, something so basic as that, cyber hygiene, can go a long way.
This comes very close to my heart because even in SCADA situation, not SCADA, but floating SCADA on the vessel, because our group company is a maritime company, so I was involved in some maritime cyber security thing. This is very common, even in the machine room.
Good
the
Lord.
OT.
Yeah.
Wow, yeah.
So, yeah. So,
Good point.
yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
I guess, you know, the one phrase that I really like, that I've learned myself is transform for resilience. Because if we
Nice
don't
one.
transform today for tomorrow we may have an impact that we can't deal with. So
Right.
for me, that's the phrase.
Very good one. I usually like to use innovate or evaporate.
There we go. There we go.
Yes, thank you.
No problem.
That.
Okay, I love that one, by the way. Now, if you look to the theme of this event, is digital trust. But if you look under the hood, if you look at the technology, they talk about zero trust. So how can you do a digital trust if there is zero trust, right? So it's a little bit of conflict, but something we need to all think about. But at the end, you need to trust somebody, right? My wife is in the room, so we need to be careful, but you always need to trust somebody, right? That's important. But the second...
Identify yourself.
Raise your hand.
Where are you?
She's sitting there, no worries. But at the end of the day, so you need to trust somebody. And who can you trust? You need to fall back to something. If it's not your wife, you need to fall back on the culture, coming back to the same statement. And I think that's something we need to think and take with us.
Very good. I think you mentioned about culture several times, definitely. And I would like to add to that in my view, a culture of a company starts from the number one man. Yeah,
Top
so
down.
that's important. All right, I think we are in time. I always make sure that I'm in time. So let's wrap up this panel and give them a good round of applause for the contribution.
And thank you, Ken, for moderating
Thank
the
you.
panel.